My name is Sienna Brooks. I'm 29 years old, and the strangest part of losing someone is realizing the exact moment they stop feeling safe. Not unloved, not unfamiliar, unsafe. For me, that moment came on a Saturday afternoon while I was sitting on my couch in old gray sweatpants, eating cereal out of a mixing bowl because I'd skipped lunch again, and told myself that counted as a personality trait instead of a problem. It was quiet in my apartment, the kind of quiet I used to love after a long week on job sites. I work as a construction foreman, which means most of my life is noise. Metal, engines, radios crackling, men yelling measurements over concrete dust, and bad timing. By the time Saturday rolls around, silence feels earned. I had my phone face down beside me. Sunlight was cutting across the coffee table. And out in the parking lot sat the most important thing I owned, my 2021 Ford F-150 XLT. Paid off. Mine. No bank attached, no lender, no monthly note hanging over my head like a threat. Title in my name, glove compartment, clean and simple. People hear that and think I'm being dramatic when I say that truck is my livelihood. I'm not. It gets me to sites before sunrise. It hauls materials. It moves equipment. It gets me where money is made. Without that truck, I don't work. Without work, I don't pay rent. There's nothing poetic about it, just math. Maybe that's why what happened hit me so fast. I knew the numbers before I knew the emotions. My boyfriend, Caleb Mercer, was 27. Charming, in the easy, practiced way some men are. He had one of those faces that made people assume good intentions before he even opened his mouth. He smiled and doors opened. He shrugged, and people filled in excuses for him. When we were good, he was easy to love. That's the truth I hate admitting, because ugly endings always make people want clean villains and clean victims. But that's not how real relationships die. They die with layers still attached. They die while you're still carrying good memories that haven't had time to rot yet. We'd been together for about 2 years. Not living together, but close enough that half his chargers were at my place and 3 of my hoodies had disappeared into his closet under suspicious circumstances. I knew the way he liked his coffee. He knew I got quiet when I was angry instead of loud. We had routines. Tuesday takeout, Friday night drives when neither of us felt like being around anyone else. The stupid private jokes that sound embarrassing if you say them out loud to another person. He drove a 2016 Honda Civic that he'd been complaining about for months. First, it was the air conditioning. Then it was a rattle in the dashboard that he swore made him anxious. Then it was the way the whole car felt off, which is not a mechanical diagnosis, but apparently sounded convincing when paired with a tired expression and a hand through his hair. He'd asked me to look at it twice. I replaced the cabin air filter once, tightened a loose interior panel another time, and discovered the mysterious rattle was caused by a bobby pin that had somehow worked its way into a vent. After that, the car was fine. Not luxurious, not freezing cold like he wanted, but fine, functional, safe, usable. That should have been the end of it. Instead, that was the beginning of the truck thing. At first, it made perfect sense. About 4 months before everything fell apart, his Civic was in the shop for a brake job. He needed a vehicle for 3 days. I handed him my keys without hesitation. He kissed my cheek, said I was a lifesaver, and brought the truck back with a full tank and one of those bakery cookies I like from the place near his office. Reasonable, appreciated, done. Then it started happening more. Could he borrow the truck to pick up a bookshelf from a friend? Could he borrow it because he had to move some storage bins? Could he borrow it because the Civic was low on gas and my truck was already closer? That last one didn't even make sense, and I remember knowing it didn't make sense even as I was tossing him the keys. That's the part nobody tells you about boundaries. You usually notice the exact place you should have set one only after someone has already walked past it. I let it go because I didn't want to be difficult. I let it go because he was my boyfriend. I let it go because women get trained, sometimes so quietly they don't even hear it happening, to confuse flexibility with kindness and discomfort with overreacting. And Caleb was good at making things seem small. That was one of his real talents. If you handed him a problem, he could shrink it with tone alone. A laugh, a shrug, a babe, relax. You're making this bigger than it is. So I kept telling myself it was just a truck. Just errands. Just temporary. Just a favor. 3 Saturdays ago, he asked to borrow it again. He said he needed to help his younger sister move some things out of her apartment. Something about a roommate situation changing. Boxes that wouldn't fit in the Civic, maybe a lamp, maybe a dresser, maybe more. I didn't ask many questions. I was off that day. not going anywhere important, and he said he'd have it back by evening. I said sure. He came by around noon, kissed me once in the kitchen, took the keys off the hook by the door, and left with a quick, "I owe you." If I had known what that sentence would cost him by the end of the month, I might have laughed. At 4:17 p.m., my phone lit up. I almost didn't look. I was midway through my cereal and half watching some home renovation show I wasn't paying attention to. But something in me, something small and primitive, noticed the timing. Not late enough for him to be back, not casual enough to ignore. I picked up the phone. His text said, "Okay, so don't freak out, but I was pulling out of a parking spot and I kind of hit a parked car. Not that bad. Just scraped the bumper. I drove away because there was no one around and I didn't want to deal with it. Your truck is fine though. Just a little scratch on the front right. Don't worry about it, LOL." I read it once, then twice, then a third time, slower, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something less disgusting if I gave them another chance. They didn't. I set the bowl down on the coffee table because suddenly I didn't trust my hands. What he had just told me in the most casual tone imaginable was this. He had been driving my truck. He had hit a parked car. He had damaged someone else's property. He had left the scene without a note, without contact information, without trying to find the owner, without calling anyone. And he had followed all of that with "don't worry about it, LOL," as if the problem here was my mood. I didn't panic. That's what still surprises me. I didn't cry. I didn't start shouting into an empty room. I didn't call him in a rage. I calculated. If the lot had cameras, and most parking lots do, then my truck was on footage. My plate was on footage. My insurance was attached to this vehicle. My name was attached to this vehicle. If the owner of that car came back, saw the damage, and filed a report, law enforcement would trace the plate to me before they ever heard Caleb's name. My boyfriend was driving is an explanation. It is not a shield. It is not magic. It does not stop a case from landing on your doorstep first. Insurance flashed through my mind next. I pay $187 a month for full coverage on that truck. If a hit-and-run claim touched my policy, even temporarily, I could be looking at a spike that would follow me for years. Then the body damage. Front right bumper on an F-150 isn't cheap work. Depending on how bad it was, repainting, pulling, blending. I knew enough from life to know little scratch was usually liar language. All of this ran through my head in maybe 3 minutes. 3 minutes, and I understood something I wish I'd understood sooner. The most dangerous people are not always the explosive ones. Sometimes they're the people who place you in danger and then ask you to stay calm so they don't feel guilty. I typed back, "Thanks for telling me." That was it. No accusation, no exclamation points, no lecture, no panic. Because by then, I had already made my decision, and I didn't want him to hear it in my tone and start deleting things. I took screenshots of the conversation immediately. Then I emailed them to myself. Then I saved them in a folder on my laptop. Then I searched for the local non-emergency police number and called. My voice sounded strangely steady when the dispatcher answered. I explained that my boyfriend had been driving my truck, had hit a parked vehicle in a parking lot, had left the scene, and had texted me admitting to it. I told her I was the registered owner and I wanted the incident documented because I did not want to be the person this came back on. She thanked me in that calm, efficient tone people in those jobs have and said an officer would call me back. When the officer did, about 40 minutes later, I repeated everything. My truck details, my name, Caleb's name and number, the approximate time, the area where he'd said he was helping his sister, the exact wording of the text. The officer paused when I read the message aloud. "He texted you that he drove away?" "Yes, sir." "In your vehicle?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have that message saved?" "I do. I can send screenshots right now." He told me where to send them, so I did. There was a brief silence after that, and I could feel the shape of the whole thing becoming real. Less relationship problem, more case file. He asked whether the driver would be available for questioning. I looked out my apartment window at the empty parking space where my truck should have been. "He will be," I said. "He's still driving my truck. He should be back this evening." The officer said they would also contact the jurisdiction where the incident occurred and check whether the owner of the other vehicle had already filed a report. He thanked me for reporting it promptly. Promptly. That word lodged itself in me, because what I had done felt, emotionally, like betrayal. But legally, practically, morally, it was the cleanest act of self-preservation I had ever performed. After the call, I sat in silence for a while. The apartment didn't feel like mine anymore. Or maybe I didn't feel like the same woman who had been eating cereal 45 minutes earlier. I kept replaying the text, not because it was confusing, but because it was so revealing. There was no real remorse in it. "No, I'm so sorry. No, I messed up. No, I left my number. Just convenience. His. A month before that day, if you had asked me what kind of man Caleb was, I would have said kind, funny, occasionally selfish in the way most people are, but ultimately decent. By that evening, decent was no longer a word I could use. He came back around 7. He pulled into my parking spot like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't tilted, like my phone wasn't already holding the proof that he had dragged my name to the edge of a criminal report and expected me to smile through it. A minute later, I heard his key in the lock. He walked in carrying a takeout bag from Chick-fil-A, warm air, and fried food following him through the door. He smiled when he saw me on the couch. "Hey, babe," he said, "want some waffle fries?" For one surreal second, I just stared at him. That was his opening line. Not "I'm sorry," not "we need to talk," not "I handled it badly." Waffle fries. I stood up slowly and said, "Maybe in a minute. I want to see the truck first." He hesitated just enough for me to notice. Then he gave a light shrug. "Sure, it's really not bad." We walked back outside together. The damage was obvious the moment I saw the front right bumper. 6-inch scrape, silver gray paint transfer, slight inward dent. Not catastrophic, but not cosmetic either. Not the kind of thing anyone honest would describe as nothing. I crouched a little, ran my fingers just above the scraped paint, then stood again. "This needs bodywork," I said. He made a face. "It's not that bad." I looked at him. "You can't buff out a dent, Caleb." He exhaled like I was being exhausting. "Okay, fine. I'll help pay for it." That word again. Help. As if the damage had mysteriously co-authored itself. "As a start," I said, "we need to talk about the other car." His expression changed. Not guilt, irritation. "What about it?" "You hit someone's parked car and drove away." He rolled his eyes. Actually rolled them. "It was a parked car, Sienna. Nobody was even in it." I felt something inside me go very still. "That doesn't matter. I barely tapped it." "You caused damage and left the scene." "Oh my God," he said, laughing once under his breath. "You're being so dramatic." There it was. The minimizing. The shrinking. The attempt to make me feel unreasonable so he wouldn't have to feel ashamed. I crossed my arms. People leave notes. People call the non-emergency line. People take responsibility. I didn't even see damage on their car. I pointed at my bumper. "You have silver paint from their vehicle on my truck." He threw one hand in the air. "Okay, so what do you want me to do now? It's done." I held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable. Then I said very evenly, "I already called the police." Everything in his face changed. The bag in his hand crinkled. "You did what?" I didn't raise my voice. "I reported a hit and run involving my vehicle. I gave them the details. They're going to follow up." He stared at me as if I had slapped him. "You reported me?" "I reported the incident before it came back on me. You called the police on your boyfriend." "No," I said. "You involved the police the second you hit a car and drove away. I made sure the record showed I wasn't the one behind the wheel." His mouth opened slightly, closed, opened again. And I knew, standing there under the parking lot lights with the smell of cooling engine metal in the air, that the worst part of this wasn't what he had done. It was what he had expected from me after. He had expected loyalty without accountability. Love without consequence. A woman willing to absorb risk quietly because it was more convenient for him than facing himself. That was the moment something ended, even before the breakup came. He looked at me like I had become someone else. But the truth was simpler. I had just stopped being useful to his version of the story. He stood in the parking lot still holding that paper bag, staring at me like I had crossed some invisible line no decent girlfriend was supposed to cross. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The night air felt colder than it had a minute earlier. Somewhere across the lot, a car door slammed. A dog barked once and went quiet. Life kept going, with that indifferent steadiness the world has when yours is busy splitting open. Then Caleb let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "I can't believe you did that." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside me detach. Not break, detach. Because breaking implies surprise. This wasn't surprise anymore. This was recognition. "I can't believe you hit someone's car and left," I said. He shifted the bag to his other hand, jaw tightening. "It was a parking lot scrape." "No, hitting the car was a parking lot scrape. Driving away made it something else." He gave me that look again. That familiar one. The one that suggested I was making ordinary life unbearable through sheer force of unnecessary morality. "You could have just talked to me first." "I did talk to you," I said. "You texted me a confession." His eyes narrowed. "You know what I mean." "I did." He meant I could have protected him first and dealt with the truth later. He meant I could have chosen him over consequences. He meant I could have acted like love was a legal strategy. I folded my arms tighter against the evening chill. If that lot had cameras, my truck was on them, my plate was on them. If the owner filed a report, they were coming to me first. You could have just waited. For what? For the police to knock on my door? His expression sharpened. You always do this. I almost laughed because that was new. That's interesting, I said. What exactly do I always do? You make everything a lesson. Everything has to become this huge principle with you. There it was again. That need to turn integrity into a personality flaw. To recast accountability as rigidity. To make my refusal to be dragged into a mess feel like the actual offense. I said very calmly, you used my truck. You hit a car. You left. I protected myself. His voice rose. From me? From the situation you created. He stared at me for a long second. His face caught somewhere between anger and disbelief, like he genuinely couldn't understand how his bad decision had ended with him being uncomfortable. Then he shook his head, muttered, "Unbelievable," and walked past me toward my apartment building. I followed a few steps behind, not because I wanted to continue the fight, but because my keys were inside and my truck, was now sitting damaged in the space where I'd left it to him in trust. Back upstairs, he dropped the food on my kitchen counter harder than necessary. The fries smelled good. That annoyed me more than it should have. He paced once through the living room, then turned toward me. So what now? You just wait for them to arrest me over a scratch? It wasn't a scratch. You haven't even seen the other car. I don't have to. There's silver paint on my bumper. He dragged a hand over his face. God, Sienna, normal couples would handle this privately. I leaned against the counter, arms still folded. Normal adults don't ask the person whose property they use to silently absorb the fallout from a hit and run. His mouth tightened. There was a flicker in his expression then. Something dangerous. Not because it was loud, but because it was so familiar. The pivot. The point where a person realizes facts aren't helping them and moves to emotion instead. You're supposed to have my back. The sentence landed heavier than shouting would have. Maybe because some part of me had always been vulnerable to exactly that kind of accusation. The idea that love was proven through endurance. That devotion meant tolerating what should never have been asked of you in the first place. But that part of me was getting quieter now. I'm not taking the fall for you, I said. He scoffed. No one said anything about taking the fall. You left the scene in my vehicle. It was an accident. Yes, I said. The accident was hitting the car. Leaving was a choice. His eyes flashed. You don't have to say it like I'm some criminal. I held his gaze. Then maybe you shouldn't have committed a crime with my truck. That shut him up for a second. Not because he agreed. Because he hated hearing it stripped of all cushioning. He grabbed the takeout bag off the counter. I'm leaving. I gave a small nod. Okay. He looked almost thrown by the lack of pleading. You're not even going to stop me? No. His face hardened. Wow. Then he left, taking the waffle fries with him. The apartment went silent again after the door shut. I stood there for a while, staring at the place on the counter where the bag had been, which is such a stupid detail to remember, but breakups aren't made of grand symbols in real life. Sometimes they live in the shape of small absences, a missing bag of food, a dent in a bumper, the hush after someone storms out and leaves their indignation hanging in your air like smoke. I didn't sleep much that night. My phone lit up twice just before midnight. Both messages were from Caleb. I can't believe you'd do this to me. Then, 15 minutes later, you made this way bigger than it needed to be. I didn't answer either one. The next morning, he sent a meme. Not an apology, not panic, not fear. A meme. That was somehow worse. There's something deeply unsettling about someone trying to drag normalcy over fresh damage like a blanket. Like if he acted casual enough, the reality would shrink to fit his mood. He sent another text around noon asking if I wanted to grab dinner the next day and talk like adults. Like adults. As if calling the police before evidence disappeared had been childish, but fleeing a collision in somebody else's truck had been mature. I left that unanswered too. 2 days after I made the report, I got the call. I was at work when it came in, standing near a pallet of tile with dust on my boots and a clipboard under one arm. The officer handling the case introduced himself again and got right to it. There was good news and bad news. The good news was that the parking lot had cameras. The bad news, he said in a tone that told me he already knew I wouldn't consider it bad news for me, was that the footage clearly showed my truck backing out of a space, striking the rear quarter panel of a silver Toyota Camry, pausing for several seconds, and then pulling away. No note. No attempt to locate the owner. No one could mistake what happened. The owner of the Camry had already filed a report the same day. They had returned to their car, found the damage, reviewed surveillance footage with the property manager, and obtained a partial plate that matched my truck. The officer told me the visible damage on the Camry included scraped paint, a cracked tail light, and a dented quarter panel. Repair estimate, around $2,100. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not because I was shocked, because I knew with a kind of grim clarity exactly what Caleb would say when he heard that number. Exaggerated. Ridiculous. No way that was real. People who minimize their actions almost always minimize the price of them too. The officer continued. Based on my report, the text message, the surveillance footage, and the matching timeline, they were treating the matter as a leaving the scene violation involving property damage. In our state, he explained, that could be charged as a misdemeanor. Fine. Possible license points. Possible jail time, though he made it clear that for a parking lot incident without injuries, actual jail was highly unlikely. Then he asked whether Caleb would come in voluntarily to give a statement or whether they would need to pursue other options. I said I would give him the information. When I hung up, I just stood there for a second, the noise of the site pressing in around me. Nail guns, forklift beeps, men calling measurements, all of it suddenly sounding far away. One of the guys on my crew asked if everything was okay. I said, yeah, automatically, because sometimes the easiest lie in the world is the one that lets you keep functioning for another hour. I called Caleb that evening. He picked up on the fourth ring. Hey, he said, in the same easy tone he used when asking what I wanted from a drive-thru. What's up? The normalcy of it made my skin crawl. The police want to speak with you, I said. Silence. Then, what? I repeated it. I gave him the officer's name, the case details, the basic facts. I told him the lot had cameras. I told him the owner of the Camry had already reported the damage. I told him the estimate was $2,100. For a moment, he said nothing. Then all the easy warmth vanished from his voice like a light switching off. They want to question me over a parking lot fender bender? It's not a fender bender, I said. It's leaving the scene. Oh my God. The other vehicle has a cracked taillight and a dented quarter panel. $2,100 for that? He snapped. That's insane. I'm telling you what the report says. He gave a bitter laugh. This is your fault. The words didn't even sting at first. They just sat there between us, ugly and absurd. My fault. If you hadn't called the police, none of this would be happening. I actually stopped pacing and stood still in my kitchen, one hand braced against the counter. The owner reported it before I called, I said. They had footage, partial plate. They were already tracing it. You don't know that. Yes, I said, my voice flattening. I do, because the officer told me. He exhaled sharply into the phone. So what? You're just going to let them come after me? That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Not, what do I do? Not, how bad is this? Not, I messed up. Just, you're going to let them come after me? As if I were standing in the way of mercy, rather than standing beside the wreckage he'd made. I'm going to let the legal process do what it does, I said. You need to talk to them, Caleb. Give your statement. Cooperate before you make it worse. I'm your boyfriend. That old line again. As though the title itself should dissolve evidence. And I was your girlfriend when you used my truck to commit a hit and run, I said quietly. He went silent. I could hear him breathing. Could almost picture the look on his face, the offended disbelief, the resentment curdling into something meaner. Then he said, you know what? Forget it. And hung up. That became a pattern. Not accountability. Not reflection. Hanging up. The next morning, I got a call from his mother. Of course I did. Her name is Denise Mercer, and she has the polished, wounded tone of a woman who has spent years turning her son's mistakes into other people's cruelty. She didn't bother with pleasantries. I understand you called the police on Caleb over a minor accident. I was in my truck outside a supply house when she called. I looked out through the windshield at two men loading drywall and felt tired all the way into my bones. I reported a hit and run involving my vehicle, I said. Your son hit a parked car and left the scene. He panicked. He's 27. He was scared. So was I said. The difference is I didn't commit a crime with someone else's property. There was a small, offended pause. Then she said, when you love someone, you support them in difficult moments. I let that sit for a second, because statements like that sound noble until you examine what they're actually asking you to do. Support. Such a beautiful word for something so ugly in practice. Support does not mean lying for him, I said. It doesn't mean risking my record or my insurance or possible charges because he didn't want to leave a note. You should have handled it privately. If the plates had been traced before I reported it, the first person they'd have contacted was me. But you knew it was him. And how exactly would I prove that after the fact if he deleted the text? If the story changed? If he decided he didn't remember? She inhaled sharply at that, and I knew I had touched something true enough to offend her. Then she delivered the line I think she believed would move me. Family protects family. I looked down at my hand on the steering wheel. We're not family, I said. And even if we were, I'm not going to let someone else's decision become my legal problem because it makes a better love story. She was quiet for a beat, then colder when she spoke again. You're going to lose him over this. The sad thing was, she thought that was leverage. I looked out the windshield again at the ordinary afternoon moving on without me. I'd rather lose a relationship than lose my future over a lie, I said. Then she hung up. That night, Caleb showed up at my apartment unannounced. He knocked once and then let himself in with the spare key I had been stupid enough not to ask back for yet. By the time I got to the entryway, he was already inside, pacing with both hands shoved through his hair. He looked different, not broken, agitated, cornered, which I would learn is not the same thing. We need to fix this, he said. I closed the door behind him and stayed standing instead of inviting him farther in. There's nothing for me to fix. Yes, there is. He turned to face me fully. I've been thinking. That phrase should have comforted me once. Now it made my stomach tighten. He took a breath, as if presenting a reasonable compromise between adults. What if we tell them you were driving? For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. I just looked at him. He kept going, mistaking my silence for consideration. You own the truck. You could say you were the one driving and didn't realize you hit anything. You pay for the damage, they close it out, and this whole thing stops spiraling. I think the most frightening moments in relationships are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're the calm ones. The moments when the person standing in front of you says something so selfish, so shameless, that your entire history with them has to rearrange itself around the new information. You want me to lie to the police, I said. His expression tightened immediately. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. It's just adjusting the story. I laughed once then, soft and disbelieving. Adjusting the story. As if crimes were furniture placement. As if truth were decor. I already told them you were driving, I said. I sent them your text where you admitted you were driving. They have surveillance footage. And now you want me to file a false report on top of all that? He started talking faster, which was always a sign he knew his position was rotten. They don't check every little thing that closely, Sienna. They just want the damage handled. The police have camera footage and your confession in writing. Because you sent it to them. Yes, I said, because I'm not stupid. His face changed at that. The softness disappeared. The fear hardened into blame. You did this. No, I said, you did. If you had just deleted the text and kept your mouth shut, I cut in before he could finish. Then I'd be the one explaining my plates on camera in a hit-and-run case. He stared at me, furious now. And then, because selfish people often reach for power when reason fails them, he delivered his last card. If you don't fix this, we're done. The words hung there. Somewhere behind the anger in his face, I think he expected me to flinch, to panic, to choose the relationship over reality, because maybe that had worked for him before with other women, or maybe it had worked in smaller ways with me. But there are moments when a threat is so revealing, it stops being frightening. I looked at him and felt only exhaustion. We're done either way, I said. His mouth parted slightly. I kept going. I would rather be alone than become a liar for you. For 1 second, I saw something like genuine shock on his face. Not guilt, not heartbreak. Just shock that the ultimatum had landed on the wrong person. Then he grabbed the spare key out of his pocket and threw it onto my entry table hard enough for it to skid. Fine. He left without another word. The door slammed behind him, and I stood there in the sudden quiet, staring at that key on the table, understanding with painful clarity that the hit and run had not destroyed the relationship. It had exposed it. The accident was one bad choice. What came after, the minimizing, the blame, the pressure, the lie he wanted me to tell for him, that was character. And character is a much more dangerous thing to discover too late. After Caleb walked out, I didn't hear from him for 3 days. No apology, no explanation, no attempt at sincerity, just silence. It was almost funny, in a bleak kind of way. The man who had spent 2 years filling rooms with easy charm, smooth recoveries, and casual affection had nothing to say once the truth stopped bending for him. When manipulation failed, he retreated. That was the pattern underneath everything, I realized. Not remorse, not repair. Withdrawal. Punishment through absence, as if disappearing could make me question my own reality. It might have worked on an earlier version of me. Not this one. I threw myself into work because work, unlike people, responds to competence. If something is uneven, you level it. If something cracks, you repair it. If someone misses a measurement, you correct it and move forward. Construction is brutal that way, but honest. Life with Caleb had become the opposite. Every fact was up for emotional negotiation. Every consequence could be recast as cruelty if it landed on him hard enough. A few days later, I found out through the officer that Caleb had finally agreed to come in and give a statement. I was sitting in my truck outside a commercial site when the call came through. Rain had just started, light at first, ticking against the windshield. The officer told me Caleb had spoken with counsel beforehand, which didn't surprise me. Men like Caleb always seem to become very respectful of procedure the moment procedure threatens them personally. The officer's tone was measured, but I could tell the case had become straightforward. The evidence was too clean. The text message, the footage from the parking lot, my preemptive report, the matching timeline, the partial plate leading back to my truck. Whatever story Caleb might have wanted to improvise had been boxed in by facts long before he sat down to give his statement. The officer told me the case was being forwarded to the district attorney's office for review. Since I was the registered owner of the vehicle and the reporting party, I remained connected to the file, so he wanted me kept informed. When I hung up, I leaned back in my seat and stared through the rain for a while. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. That was the part I hadn't expected. People always imagine that being right will feel sharp and satisfying, like striking a match. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just feels lonely. Sometimes it feels like signing the last page of something you were still secretly hoping could be repaired. Because the awful truth was, even then, some part of me was still grieving the version of Caleb I had loved before all this. The version who brought me coffee without asking, who kissed my forehead when I was half asleep on the couch, who remembered that I hated cilantro and always checked takeout orders for me. The version who stole my hoodies and swore he had no idea where they'd gone. But grief gets complicated when the person you miss is standing in the shadow of the person they revealed themselves to be. A mutual friend gave me the rest of the story before Caleb ever did. Not from gossip exactly, more like fallout. One of the guys on my crew knew Caleb's younger sister, and through that chain of ordinary small-town connection, pieces traveled. Caleb's mother had arranged for him to speak with a local attorney. The attorney had apparently told him exactly what I had been telling him from the beginning. Cooperate. Accept responsibility. Stop making it worse. There wasn't much room left for strategy. The evidence was too clear to bluff around. He was the driver. He had left the scene. My report had made it nearly impossible for him to shift the blame later. A week after that, I got the next update. The DA's office had offered Caleb a plea deal. He would plead no contest to a reduced charge of improper backing, a traffic infraction instead of a misdemeanor. He would pay restitution to the Camry owner for the full repair amount, $2,100. He would pay a $350 fine. He would complete a 4-hour defensive driving course. And if he completed all of it within 90 days, the matter would stay at the infraction level rather than rising back into something more damaging to his record. I sat at my kitchen table while the officer explained it, one hand around a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm halfway through the call. When he finished, I thanked him. Then I just sat there for a while in the quiet. It was a good deal. Better than Caleb deserved, if I was being honest. A parking lot collision by itself was one thing. Panic was one thing. But panic followed by arrogance, blame, and pressure to commit another crime for him, that was harder to forgive. Still, the justice system doesn't operate on my feelings, and probably shouldn't. They had bigger problems than one selfish man who thought love exempted him from accountability. The legal math on his side added up fast. $2,100 in restitution, $350 fine, attorney consultation fees, whatever those cost. The defensive driving course, all of it because he hadn't wanted to leave a note. A note, a stupid rectangle of paper under a windshield wiper with a phone number and insurance information. That was the line between inconvenience and collapse, between an insurance claim and a legal case, between shame and damage. One decent choice, and none of this spiraled. That was the part that stayed with me the most. How cheap responsibility had been compared to the price of running from it. As for my truck, I handled that quietly. The Monday after the whole mess began, I took it to a body shop a guy from one of our subcontractor crews recommended. Family-owned place. Honest estimate. No unnecessary upselling. The owner came out, crouched by the front right bumper, ran his fingers near the dent, and gave me the look mechanics give when they already know you've been lied to. Not a buff job, he said. No, I said, I figured. They had to pull the bumper, repaint it, blend the surrounding area, and make sure the finish matched cleanly. Total cost, $1,140. I paid it out of pocket. I could have filed a claim through insurance, maybe, but I wasn't willing to risk rate increases over something I hadn't done. And more than that, I didn't want any part of this living longer in my life than necessary. I wanted the truck fixed. I wanted it clean. I wanted one thing, at least, restored to function. When I picked it up, the bumper looked brand new. That should have comforted me more than it did. Instead, seeing it repaired only sharpened something in me, because now there was a number attached to the damage. Not vague annoyance, not symbolic betrayal. A bill, a real one, a measurable consequence. I waited until Caleb's legal side seemed mostly settled before contacting him about it. Maybe that was generosity. Maybe it was strategy. Maybe I just didn't want another round of him accusing me of piling on while he was still scrambling to protect himself. Either way, one evening I texted him the invoice from the body shop. "This is the repair cost for the damage to my truck. I'm asking you to cover it since you caused it." He responded faster than I expected. "Are you serious?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back. "Yes." 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then reappeared. Finally, "I just paid over $2,000 in restitution and a fine, and now you want me to pay for your truck too?" I read that message twice, and what struck me most was that even now, even after everything, he still spoke about consequences like they had appeared from nowhere, as if he were being persecuted by coincidence rather than billed by reality. I wrote back, "The restitution was for the other person's car. The fine was for leaving the scene. The truck repair is for the damage to my property. Those are 3 separate consequences of one decision." He took longer to answer that one. When his response came, it was exactly what I should have expected. "I don't have that kind of money right now." That, at least, sounded plausible. Carelessness is expensive, but inability didn't bother me nearly as much as the entitlement underneath it, the assumption that his financial strain somehow erased my loss. So I replied, "I can give you some time, but the bill is still yours." His answer came back almost immediately. "You're unbelievable. You reported me, ruined everything, and now you want another $1,140 from me?" Ruined everything. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath through my nose. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from arguing with someone who insists on confusing cause and effect. It's like trying to explain weather to a man who thinks the umbrella made the storm. I typed carefully, "You damaged my truck. Asking you to pay for that is not punishment. It's accountability." His reply was short. "I'm not paying you. Sue me." I actually smiled when I read that, though there wasn't much humor in it, because by then I knew something he apparently still didn't. Threats only work on people who are still hoping to be liked. I wasn't. The following week, I filed in small claims court. The process was almost boring in how simple it was, which felt fitting after weeks of emotional chaos. Filing fee, forms, copies of the invoice, photos of the bumper damage, the police report documenting Caleb as the driver, the screenshots of the texts. Organized, chronological, undeniable. There is something almost soothing about paperwork when your personal life has become theatrical. Facts laid flat on clean pages. No tone to decode, no size, no blame, just sequence and evidence. He was served at his apartment around 10 days later. I didn't have to imagine how he took it. News reached me the same way everything else had, through the loose grapevine of mutual acquaintances and family proximity. He'd lost his temper. His mother had been called. A friend of hers who worked as a paralegal had apparently been consulted. There had been frantic attempts to figure out whether the matter could be explained away. Explained. Always that word. As if the problem had never been what happened, only how unpleasant it was to have it described accurately. 2 days after he was served, Denise called me again. Her timing was impressive, I'll give her that. Like maternal outrage had a tracking device. "You're suing him over a bumper?" I was standing in my kitchen cutting a lemon when the call came. For a second, I just stared at the bright yellow half in my hand, absurdly struck by how ordinary life remained, while people kept trying to drag me back into their moral distortion. "I'm suing him over $1,140 in damage to my vehicle that he caused and refused to pay for. He's already paid thousands because of you." There it was again. Because of you. Not because he hit a car and fled. Not because he lied by omission, minimized it, tried to shift blame, and then refused to cover the damage he caused. Because of me. I set the knife down very carefully. "He paid because of what he did," I said. "Everything that happened after that came from his choices." Her voice cooled. "You could have handled this as a couple." "We are not a couple." "You were. Not after he asked me to lie to the police for him." That bought me a brief silence. I could almost hear her recalculating. deciding whether denial or indignation would work better. Finally, she said, "You're a very cold person, Sienna." I looked at the lemon on the cutting board and almost laughed. Maybe I was colder than I had been before Caleb. Maybe that's what happens when warmth is treated like permission. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not the one who damaged someone else's property and refused to take responsibility." She made a small sound of disgust and ended the call. I finished cutting the lemon after that and stood in my kitchen with citrus on my fingers and a court date on the calendar, thinking about how strange it is that some people will call you cruel simply because you stop volunteering to be useful to their chaos. The hearing was set for about 3 weeks out, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt calm. Not happy, not healed, but calm, because the shape of the truth no longer depended on emotion. It existed outside of him now, outside of me even, in records, in payments, in court filings, in the repaired curve of my bumper and the absence of him in my apartment. There was one final thing left unsettled, and I had a feeling he was about to learn that refusing responsibility doesn't erase a debt. It only delays the moment it comes due. Stop. Continue. Part 4. About a week before the court date, I was sitting at my kitchen table going through invoices from work when my phone buzzed. A notification from Venmo. For a second, I thought it might be one of the guys from the crew paying me back for lunch or something small, something normal. It wasn't. It was a request. From Caleb for $1,140. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was looking at. Not a payment, a request. With a note that said, "Here, are you happy now?" I let out a slow breath, leaned back in my chair, and actually laughed once. Short, disbelieving, not amused. Even now, even at the very end of this, he still needed to feel like the victim. He still needed the last word to carry a hint of accusation. Like paying for something he owed was somehow something being done to him instead of something being done by him. For a second, I considered just ignoring it, letting the court handle everything, letting a judge explain to him what I had already explained a dozen times. But I didn't want to drag this out any longer than necessary. So I declined the request. Then I texted him, "Please send payment directly. Not a request. Venmo or check is fine." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. No message came. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a payment. $1,140. No note, no apology. Just the money. I looked at the confirmation screen for a long moment, thumb hovering over it, as if I expected something else to appear. Some final sentence, some acknowledgement, something that resembled understanding. Nothing did. And that, more than anything else, felt like closure. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just an ending that made sense. I screenshotted the payment, saved it, filed the dismissal paperwork for the small claims case the next morning. Lost the $75 filing fee, but I didn't care. At that point, $75 felt like a cheap price for silence. For distance. For being done. If you added everything up, the numbers told a story that was almost absurd in its simplicity. Caleb's total cost. $2,100 in restitution to the Camry owner. $350 fine. A few hundred for legal consultation. A defensive driving course. $1,140 for my truck. Roughly $4,000. All because he didn't leave a note. A piece of paper. A phone number. Basic decency. That was the difference between a manageable mistake and a cascade of consequences. My side of the equation was quieter. Truck repaired. Insurance unchanged. Driving record clean. One relationship gone. Which, depending on how you look at it, might have been the most valuable thing I didn't have to carry forward. The officer handling the case called one last time to confirm everything had been resolved. He told me, in that same calm, professional tone, that what I had done, reporting it immediately, providing evidence, cooperating, was exactly what a vehicle owner is supposed to do in a situation like that. It made the case straightforward, he said. Straightforward. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for a minute, letting that word settle. Because nothing about it had felt straightforward. It had felt messy, personal, painful, like choosing between 2 losses and trying to pick the one you could live with. But from the outside, from the place where facts live, it had been simple. That's the thing about doing the right thing. It rarely feels clean when you're inside it. Life didn't transform after that. There was no dramatic glow-up montage. No sudden clarity where everything felt lighter. Just normal. Work stayed busy. We were deep into a commercial build. Long days, early mornings, the steady rhythm of progress measured in materials and time. My brother came over one weekend and we grilled burgers on my small balcony. He asked how everything with the truck situation ended, and I told him. He listened, chewing slowly, then shook his head. "She texted you a confession," he said, "and then asked you to lie to the cops?" "Yeah." He let out a low whistle. "That's deficient. Two bad decisions for the price of one." I smiled a little at that, because it was true. Caleb had a talent for stacking mistakes. I heard bits and pieces about him through other people. Apparently, he was telling anyone who would listen that I had overreacted, that I had ruined his life over a minor fender bender, that I had turned something small into something huge. And in a way, he wasn't entirely wrong. It had started small, a scrape in a parking lot, a moment of bad judgment, but it didn't stay small, because he didn't let it. Leaving the scene made it bigger. Refusing to take responsibility made it worse. Asking me to lie made it unforgivable. That's the part people like him never quite understand. It's not the mistake that defines you. It's what you do after. I don't miss him. Not exactly. I miss having someone to share the quiet with. Dinner on a random Tuesday. The easy, thoughtless parts of being with someone. The inside jokes. The way he used to steal my hoodies and pretend he didn't know where they were. Those things were real, but so was everything else. The part where he used my property without respecting what it meant to me. The part where he made a selfish decision and expected me to carry the consequences. The part where he tried to rewrite reality instead of facing it. You can't separate those things. You can't keep the version of someone that felt good and discard the version that put you at risk. They're the same person. And once you see that clearly, the decision stops being complicated. Sometimes I think about that text. Don't worry about it, lol. It's almost funny now. Almost. Because that sentence tells you everything about how someone sees the world. What they minimize. What they assume will disappear. What they expect other people to absorb for them. If there's one thing I took from all of this, it's this. Love is not a legal defense. Dating someone is not an agreement to share consequences you didn't create. And responsibility doesn't become optional just because it's inconvenient. My truck runs perfectly. The bumper looks brand new. My insurance stayed exactly where it was. My record is clean. My apartment is quieter. But it's a clean kind of quiet. The kind that doesn't come with tension sitting just under the surface, waiting for the next small thing to turn into something bigger because someone refuses to do the right thing when it's easy. If I could go back, I wouldn't change what I did. Not the call. Not the report. Not the lawsuit. Not the ending. Because sometimes protecting your future looks to the wrong person, like betrayal. And sometimes the clearest sign you made the right choice is that they never understand why you had to. So here's my advice, for whatever it's worth. Protect your property. Protect your record. And if someone hands you waffle fries after crashing your truck and fleeing the scene, take the fries. But still call the police.